Dave?
We might as well start a park commission meeting on time for a change. So, so with that, I'll park commission meeting by asking Michelle if we have a quorum for the meeting.
Yes, you do.
We do have a quorum for the meeting. First item of the agenda, as always on the meeting, is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. You've all received a copy. Any additions or corrections to the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the minutes of the previous meeting as written. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Same thing for the fiscal actions report. We all have a copy of those. Any corrections or additions?
Move to accept.
Second.
It's been moved to accept and then moved to seconded. All in favor of approving the fiscal actions report, so indicate. Thank you. Opposed? None. It's carried. The first item on the agenda, I believe you wanted it, Dave is on the phone at the moment, but we have a report on the Queensbury inspection program by David Hayton of Queensbury, and I'll let Dave introduce him. You ready to introduce him, Dave?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we're very pleased to have with us Dave Hatton. Dave is the longtime codes officer for the town of Queensbury and has been in charge of their septic inspection program upon property transfer. They've learned, I believe, a lot. Dave was kind enough to educate me about their program recently, and I asked him to come in front of our commission and talk to all of us and kind of let us know how the program is going. And I figured we'd have some questions for him. So I appreciate you coming, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. What I'll do is I'll go through this presentation, and at the end, if anybody has any questions specific to anything I covered, please feel free to ask. We're very open about this program, and it's been very successful, so I'm pleased to share this with you. So just to jump into this, 2 years ago, the town of Queensbury adopted a property transfer law, which required any properties that were in the waterfront residential zone to be inspected. This include any transfer of deeds as well. So it's not just the physical transfer of property from one owner to another. It's also if there's a deed change within a family, and we've seen a number of different one of those. In fact, I received 2 today where they did not get the property transfer inspection prior to the deed change. So we'll talk about what property is affected. I'll go through the inspection process. I'll go through what we're inspecting for and we're looking for when we inspect the system. Our local law does have minimum standards in it, and we'll go through what those minimum standards are. We do have some exemptions. There are 5 exemptions that we'll go through. And then I kind of put together a little history of what we found over the last 2 years. Even though it says 9 months data, I should say 2 years. That we have seen that have, I think, had a positive impact on the program and the lakes that it protects. And we'll discuss those at that time. So this is the language in our current law, which says the conveyance of real property means the transfer of title of real property in a form of a deed or a legal instrument, whether or not recorded in the office of the Warren County Clerk. So this is anytime there is a change in deed in the waterfront residential zone within Queensbury, these properties have to have a septic inspection. This just doesn't affect Lake George. It's Glen Lake, the Hudson River, Sunnyside, and a couple other shoreline issues. And this is just not lakefront properties either. The waterfront residential zone does extend beyond the waterfronts. So it does catch properties that may be on the opposite side of the roads that surround the lakes. So there is some reach out beyond just the lake shore itself. So. And this just says that you can't sell your property unless you demonstrate satisfactory compliance with the law as it's written, or you obtain a variance or a waiver from the town board. Or you've had a property transfer inspection within the past 3 years. So those are the only 3 ways that a property under the town of Queensbury in the waterfront residential zone can transfer hands, by deed or by conveyance. This is one of the most common questions we get asked when it comes to scheduling one of these inspections. Somebody finds out they're in a waterfront residential zone, they have to schedule inspection. They think it's just filling out paperwork, having their septic tank pumped out, and then they're done. And our process is a little more involved in that, so I'll go through the process. And if anybody has any questions while I'm explaining the process, please feel free to stop me and ask. So we have all our forms online. It's a 3-page form. You pay a $275 fee. And then once you file that, we also asked if you have a plot plan of this property that shows the septic system, the septic tank, and any associated items with the septic tank, pump stations, if there's holding tanks on a property, or any leach fields or seepage pits. Believe it or not, some people have no idea what they have on their property, and we've had to actually physically go out and have them expose parts of the property to find out what they have. We just had one last week where that was the case. It's been put in over 30 years ago, was done without a permit, and we had no record of it, and the owner didn't either. So once we accept the paperwork, we give them 48 hours to schedule an inspection. After 48 hours, they can schedule the inspection. And when we go out there, what we're looking for is that they expose the inlet and the outlet of the septic tank or holding tanks, depending what type of system they have. They expose any pump stations that they have on the property. They expose any distribution boxes and or seepage pits on the property. If they have a pressurized dosing field, then they have to dig a hole in the middle of the field so we can see if there's any standing water in the middle of the field. So that's what has to be done prior to our arrival. And that's usually where we have the biggest problem, is making people understand everything they have to do, because it's something more than anybody's ever had to do when it comes to inspecting your septic system. A typical house inspection done by a home inspector, he has a septic hauler come in, they pump the tank, and if they see water flow back in the tank, then they consider the field failed. They don't go beyond the tank. I fought very hard, and the town board agreed with me that exposing the distribution box of any field out there is very important. And ironically, the first inspection we did 2 years ago, we found that the line from the pump station to the distribution, or to the septic tank, was broken. And when we exposed the distribution box, we found out that only one seepage pit was getting water for the 20 years the system had been installed. The other seepage pit had never seen effluent in its 20 years. So the first inspection out of the box for this program kind of hit the worst of everything we could possibly find, which was kind of ironic. So any questions on any of that at all? Okay, I'll move on. As I said, we require that they give us 40 hours before they schedule an inspection. We have to have a registered septic hauler there to pump the tank after we do our inspection and our flow test. We do require that they have water on to the dwellings on the property. We will flow test every water fixture to make sure it flows into a septic tank and not into a gray water system. And right now our checklist has about 75 items on it that we check for, depending on the type of system they have and what's involved with that system. So this kind of gives you an overview of what we're looking for when we do the inspection. We're making sure that all effluent flows into a septic tank. We're making sure that all septic tanks and holding tanks are within 250 gallons of the size requirement. And that size requirement goes by the number of bedrooms, whether they have any whirlpool, jacuzzi tubs, and if they have any garbage grinders. A whirlpool, jacuzzi tub, and a garbage grinder counts as a bedroom under the standards. So we've had systems where we've gone in and found a 1,000-gallon tank. They've had 6 bedrooms, 2 jacuzzi tubs, and a garbage grinder, and they had to put in a 2,000-gallon septic tank replacement. We're looking for any metal tanks. We have found very few out there, but they are out there. We're looking for any failed systems, and I would say direct failure is where we see standing effluent, like you see here in this center picture, coming to the surface. That's been very few, maybe 1 or 2 out of the 101 that we've done so far to date. So again, we're looking for malfunctioning systems. So we get into the distribution boxes. We look for effluent that's raised up in the distribution boxes and not at the bottom of the piping. And a lot of times what we're finding with distribution boxes, one of the most common things we're finding is distribution boxes are not level, and therefore only part of the system is getting the effluent. It's not equal distribution. So as you can see down this lower right photograph here, we have speed levers that the septic haulers will install to solve that problem, so they don't have to remove the D-box and replace it. We do occasionally find a distribution box that has been crushed or is in disrepair, or the baffle in it is missing, so we make them repair that at that time. So, and then it's just whether we find other things that are just kind of out of the ordinary. We do find a lot of tanks where the baffles in the septic tanks have rotted out over the age of the septic tank, and we replace that with a sanitary tee that you see in the lower left of this slide here. And like I said, 60% of the systems that we see out there need some type of repair. Another 20% are generally a total replacement, or the owners replace the systems as they buy the properties. So somewhere around 60 to 80% of properties need some type of minor or major repair, with the minor repair being the more prevalent. So there are seepage pits out there. We do find them around the lakes. We look for the level of the effluent in. That's why we require that they expose the covers. We're basically trying to figure out if the structure is still stable. A lot of times these have wood covers, so the covers will rot out. So we'll make them replace it with a concrete cover that has an access to it, so they can keep it on a level. One of the biggest problems we found out with seepage pits is that one seepage pit is getting all the effluent and the other one is not getting any. That's been the biggest thing we found with seepage pits out there. So. Pump stations, we're looking to make sure that they're sealed, especially if they're inside of the dwelling. This particular one here in the lower left was in a crawl space. This is the one where the pump line there was severed going up to the septic tank and was pumping effluent just into the ground, under the ground, within about 80 feet of the lake. But we also found there was a methane problem because it wasn't sealed in a crawl space, which could have caused a problem down the road. Most holding tanks we have found out need some type of repair with the alarm systems and the water shutoff. And we have found water shutoffs that have been removed by owners over time so that they can still continue to use their holding tanks. And the alarm systems are either malfunctioning or removed. So we have had to make them replace them. And I would say that's been with half the holding tanks we've seen out there so far. So. As I said earlier, the town has 12 conditions that are considered failures. One is that you don't have a septic tank on the property at all, and it just discharges into some type of collection area or system. There has to be a septic tank associated with every system we inspect. We haven't seen any discharge directly to any ground surfaces. I guess that's a good thing, but that would be considered automatic failure. Any gray water systems, so if people have dry wells for their sinks or laundries and they don't flow in the septic tank, we have had, I think, 1 or 2 instances where we made them redo the plumbing to make sure that that dry well is abandoned and everything flows in the septic tank. We haven't had to perform any dye tests yet to prove to people that they are having a direct discharge in the lake. That one I can say we haven't seen yet. If the person has backup sewage in the home, that's an automatic failure. If they're required to pump their tank more than 4 times a year, then they are required to replace the system as well. Any metal tanks or cesspools are required to be replaced. Any holding tank that discharges to any area is an automatic failure, and that has to be removed. We haven't found that yet with any holding tanks that we've inspected. And again, no septic tank, seepage pit, or enhanced treatment unit shall be permitted to discharge any natural outlets adjoining property. We haven't seen that problem yet. And there can be no standing water in distribution box or seepage pit, and we have found that with distribution boxes. I think we found 2 or 3 now where we've exposed the distribution box, found standing water to the top of the distribution box where they were actually somewhat pressurized. And the owner never knew they had a problem until we dug up the distribution box, and it would not have shown in a standard home inspection by pumping the tank. So it showed that exposing the distribution box is a very important part of these inspections. And then if we have any plumbing fixtures for whatever reason don't drain a septic tank, that would be considered an automatic failure. Should the inspection fail, the owner at the time is given a copy of the inspection with any violations or any corrections that need to be made. And they are required to make any repairs within 6 months and put up a $2,000 deposit to make those repairs if there's not something that can be accomplished fairly quickly and easily. So if they have a failed system, it has to go through the Board of Health for review and get their approvals before we can issue a permit. They're given 6 months to do that. And they have to put up a $2,000 deposit to assure they will do that. As I said earlier, there's 5 exemptions in our law that allow people to deal with certain conditions, especially with the winter we just went through. One of the first ones is an owner intends to tear down the dwelling on the property and replace the septic system. They will pay a $2,000 deposit, submit an affidavit. That's what they're going to do to us. And they're given 6 months to accomplish the demolition and remove the septic system. And then they can take whatever time frame they wish to replace the home. But the $2,000 deposit is put on hold. And if they fail to do it in 6 months, they forfeit that $2,000 deposit. The second one is that they're not able to complete the property transfer due to inclement weather. So typically December, January, February are the months where we have frost in the ground. The owners don't want to pay the expensive digging and chipping away to get at septic tanks, seepage pits, or leach fields. So they will put up a $2,000 deposit, give us a notarized letter that says this is what they're going to do. And they have 6 months or to June 1st to complete the inspection. And that typically is done by the new owner. So, and they will, what we've seen so far, and the town is not concerned about it, but typically the buyer or the seller will hold money in escrow for the cost of a new system should they find problems with the system. Number 3 is very similar to number 2. It's just that for whatever reason they couldn't get their repairs done within 6 months because of inclement weather. So again, they're given an exemption with a $2,000 deposit and an affidavit to get it done within 6 months or by June 1st. So, and the town board has extended those dates depending on with COVID, especially being one of the biggest obstacles we faced over the past year. The town board has given extensions for that 6 months or June 1st, depending on the situation. The fourth one is the property will be purchased, new system will be installed within 6 months. We have seen this where a lot of individuals decide when they buy the property, they want a new system. They don't want to take a chance with the old system. And they go through the process of getting approvals by the town board because most of them typically require some type of variance. And then we will issue a permit and they will install the system within 6 months or ask for an extension if they can't do it within 6 months, but they also put a $2,000 deposit down as well. And the fifth one is if there has been a record of property transfer inspection within 3 years. So we have done an inspection within 3 years, which that hasn't happened yet. We're into our 3rd year right now. So anything after next year would possibly qualify for that 3-year inspection. Any questions so far?
Yeah, Dave, I have a few questions. First is on the initial exposure of the tanks, does the homeowner pay for those?
Yes.
Okay. Second is you mentioned that the number of bedrooms and jacuzzis, and do you inspect the house to make sure how many bedrooms and jacuzzis they have?
Yes, we do. We actually do 2 things. We compare it with our assessment records to make sure what's in our assessment records is what they put on the application. And then we will physically do an inspection because we flow every water fixture in the home. So we will have access to the entire home. So we will look for garbage grinders, jacuzzi tubs, and then we will add up the number of bedrooms we see and make sure that the tank falls within 250 gallons of that.
Okay, and do you do any commercial properties yet?
I can't say we've had any commercial requests yet that I can think of right off the top of my head. So,
Okay,
but it would apply no matter whether it's private or commercial because it's in the waterfront residential zone.
right.
Dave, how do you find the realtors and attorneys cooperating or reacting to this?
In the beginning, we had a big problem with deed transfers. We had several properties that were transferred with deeds done by out-of-area attorneys. That has slowly turned around. Like I said, I checked this morning. I've got 2 properties that were done that have not had inspections. One is on Lake George, one is on Glen Lake. I will probably find out that the attorneys are from out of the area. Most of the attorneys and realtors in the area are aware of this now. So I think the word has gotten out and it's gotten better. We've seen less properties that have not been inspected when the property transfers, but I'm not going to say, usually every time I ask for a report from the assessor's office, on deed transfers, there's generally 1 or 2. So, but when we initially started, it was 12 to 15. So it has gotten better.
Dave, can I sneak in there for a second? Is there any way to measure actual flow out of the buildings into the septic system? Is there a way to figure out or give credit to or encourage low flow systems, gray water filtration systems, those sorts of things, water conserving toilets, blah, blah, blah?
We don't get into the amount of water that goes in the septic tank. When we do the water flow of all the fixtures in the home, the only thing we're concerned about is making sure that everything flows into a septic tank and not into a gray water system. And like I said, we've had very few, but we have had a couple where we've had to have them redo the interior plumbing to get everything to go to the septic tank and abandon the gray water systems.
Dave, what kind of a cost are you looking at for these inspection processes?
That's a hard one for me to put a number on. In fact, it's in a slide, one of the last slides I've got coming up here, is the unknown cost is what it's going to cost to expose the parts of the system we need to see. And that's probably been the number one complaint is, number one, people are wondering why we have to do all this, and we tell them it's right in the law, it's right in the application. So it's and it's out there. It's not like we're trying to hide it, but it depends on if the homeowner's going to do it themselves, or they're going to hire somebody, or they have a friend that will do it. And a lot of that depends on the system, how deep it is below the surface, and what type of system they have. So that's a variable that varies property to property. And I can't speak to that cost because it does vary quite a bit. So.
Dave, are you aware of any other communities in, I'll just say northern New York that have enacted similar requirements?
The only one I know of for sure in Warren County is the town of Bolton has a very similar program to us, but they hire third-party inspectors, which we don't do here. It has to be done by one of the code enforcement officers within the town of Queensbury. It can't be done by any outside agencies. So we have total control of it. I know there are several watershed communities that do part of this as a part of their down in the Finger Lakes and things like that. But in upstate New York, I don't know of any. I've had calls from 2 communities in northern New York looking to do something similar to this, but I don't know what the status of those inquiries are.
Hey, Dave, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. How many properties are under your jurisdiction?
Well, I mean, total town of Queensbury, I think it's somewhere around 12 to 13,000, if I remember right, last count. So,
But are affected by this transfer, by the water.
that one I would have to find out for you. I don't know the exact number that's in the waterfront residential zone, and I don't remember if that was ever researched. It seems to me somebody did pull a number at one time during the trying to put this program together, but I don't recall what that number is. So,
Okay, thanks.
Dave, are you required to surcharge the system before you inspect it, like run an average daily flow through it?
no, we do not. Any other questions?
Hey, Dave, do you get any pushback from people allowing you to go into their house?
I have to say that I was surprised. I thought for sure over the last 2 years we would have found some pushback, but so far we have had none.
Really?
People want to do the right thing with this. I mean, we've had people are not happy they have to do it, but they have allowed us to do it and understand why they have to. They might not be happy about it, but the pushback of just stonewalling us, not allowing us to do it, has not happened yet.
Good.
Who's
Okay.
picking up most of the responsibility, the owners or the buyers?
That's kind of a shared, depending on the deal between the seller and the buyer. In the town of Queensbury, we've explained to people, we don't care who pays for the inspection. We don't care who pays for any repairs that are necessary or replacements. We just want to know that compliance is going to be met. So it's worked a lot of different ways. There seems to always be some type of concession if there's a waiver requested from doing it right away to hold it for 6 months. There's some type of concession in the deal between the owner and the seller and the buyer. But the way the law works is the current owner is responsible. And after the sale takes place, if they got an exemption, the current owner after the sale is responsible to comply. So we made sure that we have somebody that is responsible before or after the sale, depending on when the inspection is done.
Dave, does the owner have to pay for your time, or are they just responsible for the exposure and any repairs that have to be made?
I would say most of the time it's the owner that pays the application fee, but we have had some buyers pay the application fee because the owners say this is on you, you want to buy the property. So the buyer is actually paid for the application and the pump outs and the exposure of the system.
But they don't pay for your time specifically.
The $275 application fee covers our costs.
Really?
Yes.
That's a good deal.
So we're there. An average inspection takes anywhere from an hour, maybe up to 2 hours, depending on how large the system is, what we have to do. I will send 2 inspectors so we can do the flow test quicker, so that we can get the inspection done. We don't inconvenience people and have the septic hauler there sitting for an hour, hour and a half.
Right.
Once the flow test is done, my one inspector will leave, go on his business with his other inspections, and we'll leave the other inspector there to finish the paperwork.
Dave, you do dye tests and that kind of thing?
We can if we have to, yes.
Dave, have you experienced a buyer who was going to tear down the existing structure and rebuild from zero up, who wasn't planning on doing the septic improvement?
No,
Or
we have
replacement?
not seen that. No, it's pretty much understood because the building code require it. Then unless there is a modern system there for a new structure that meets today's standards, or they have a system by variance from the town board, that they have to put in a new system. And that's also required by our zoning ordinance. So
Dave, did I hear you correctly that for the inspection of the septic tank, that the septic tank has to be totally pumped out? Is this correct?
at the end of the inspection, yes, they have to pump the tank out so we can look at the structure and make sure it's still intact, and any parts of the structure that we couldn't see because it was full of effluent, we can look at those like baffles or anything that might show deterioration to a point where it might need to be replaced.
Is a gravity system a pretty easy one to inspect?
For the most part, yeah. You have everything flows in the septic tank, flows in the distribution box. We look at the distribution box to make sure effluent does flow to the distribution box, and it's dispersed throughout the field. So that is probably the simplest of all inspections we do.
Dave, do you ever camera the lines, the actual sewer lines?
We don't camera the lines, the effluent lines in the field. But we have had a few septic haulers have cameras now where they've used cameras to locate the distribution box because they couldn't find them, or the septic tank. We've had, so they've done both. So that's used more as to find the elements that we need to expose of the system, but we don't have them camera the lines now.
Dave,
Yes.
have you ever come across any leach fields that haven't drained into proper soils that can hold it, like, for example, wetlands that, I mean, you're talking about inspecting within 250 feet of the shoreline. And I'm just wondering if there have been lots and parcels where there hasn't been enough real estate, enough land to have an adequately planned out leach field. And in that case, what have you done? Even if the system is pretty new and it seems to be working okay, but is not leaching correctly.
Well, there's quite a few avenues that you asked there, so let me try to address one of them at a time. First of all, our waterfront residential zone does expand beyond 250 feet of lakeshore, depending on where it is. So it goes by the zoning requirements for the waterfront residential zone, which could be several hundred feet off the lake. And that does happen. We've had probably a half dozen properties that are 400 to 500 feet from the lake, yet they still are caught by the inspection process. The second part is I've never seen a leach field in a wetlands. Most leach fields or seepage pits, septic tank systems are in close proximity to the dwelling. We do have small lots where they have been forced to go to holding tanks because they have no room for a leaching device. We have a number of those in the town of Queensbury that the town board has issued variances for over the last 30 years. And I can't say we found anything that would endanger a wetland or anything like that. We have found direct failures by exposing D-boxes. We have found systems where the laid up stone block or laid up block seepage pit has basically deteriorated where they've had to think about replacing it. We do have a lot of voluntary compliance where people know they have metal tanks and because of the law have just replaced their metal tank with a new modern aerobic system or some type of septic tank. So I'd say that we haven't found any egregious violations through this, but we have found problems through this that could lead to failure or have led to failure. So I don't know if that addresses everything you asked about. So
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, let me just finish out here. And if you have any more questions as we go, please feel free to ask. Our ordinance does allow for appeals of any decision I make as Director of Building Codes when it comes to the property transfer requirements. The town board also can issue waivers on the property transfer requirements if they feel it's warranted. We have had a number of systems, I shouldn't say a number, we've had some systems where people have asked to keep their existing systems under the property transfer and not replace them, even though they didn't meet all the standards of today that is required by our zoning ordinance. And the town board has issued, I think, 3 or 4 of those over the past 2 years. So, but they have to make that appeal within 60 days. Otherwise, my decision stands. This kind of gets back to a question I've asked, how much pushback have we had from this? Basically, we do have requirements and penalties for not meeting those requirements in law. So if a property owner fails to complete an inspection in the required timeframes, if they don't allow access to the property or they fail to comply with the provisions of any other part of this article, they can face a $950 fine for each week the violation exists. And there is a 15-day jail time in there as well. So I can tell you with surprising, I'm thinking the best word to use, I'm very surprised we've never had to use this. We've been very successful and people have been not always receptive, but have done the right thing here. So I think it's something that people know to protect the lakes, they have to do this. And there has been no out and out pushback as to we're not going to do this and the town of Queensbury is not going to tell me what I can have to do on my property. We've had none of that to date, which I'm very pleased with. So,
Keep your fingers crossed.
yeah, hopefully I won't jinx myself. So, all right, so I've talked about some of these failures we've identified to date. I just go through and make sure I've covered them all. The biggest one, like I said, with holding tanks is the alarms and the water shutoffs either not working or removed. Pump stations we found that aren't sealed. Inside it, so if they have a small pump station within the foundation, they aren't properly sealed and vented, so they have allowed methane gas to leak in a crawl space. We found a pump station with a broken line that was pumping into the ground and was not connected to the distribution box. The owner had no clue of this until we did the inspection. Septic tanks missing baffles and sanitary tees is a common one. That's a pretty easy fix that can be done a lot of times while we're right there doing the inspection, or we can come back the next day. Distributions that are not level. We find this is probably the most common issue we find when we inspect systems, and speed levelers are put in a distribution box by the septic hauler, and that solves the problem. They put the cover back on the D-box and life goes back to normal. Inlet and outlet septic tanks buried too deep to get access. Now, one of the things we do is if they're over 12 inches below grade, we do require that they put a cover on the inlet and the outlet of the septic tank to encourage them to pump it down the road. We have found several septic tanks that have never been exposed or have never had both covers off to look at the baffles to make sure the baffles are in place. And that's probably, those two right there are the most common one we find on 60% of the inspections we do. We have found crushed drain lines leading to leach fields from the septic tank so that it's restricted flow to the leach field. We found leach fields and seepage pits that are totally in failure. That's been a very small percentage of them. And we have found metal tanks, but again, that's been a very small percentage of them. And that's with 27 months of inspection so far.
Dave, I have a question for you related to what you found. This is from a member of the public that's in the meeting now, and they want to know if you found any compacted, not functioning leach fields.
I wouldn't say compacted is the correct word I would use. I would say we found leach fields that have totally failed, and for whatever reason, they're not allowing effluent to exit the leach lines or the seepage pits due to buildups of biomats and things like this, and they are in failure. So.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, have you had a resale of a property that's within a homeowners association that has a common homeowners association system? So they'd have to go to their neighbors to get the neighbors to support, or the business partners to support the correction process.
If it's part of a homeowner association, we do require that the owner provide access to their septic tank and their dwelling so we can do the flow test. From there, we have to work with the homeowner association to get access to either a pump station or the leaching device. So they would have to expose those. And we have done that with some bigger homeowner associations. All right, so just to wrap up my presentation, this is as of last week, we had 101 permits that we've issued to date. 60% of those have required some type of minor repair. About 20% have required more than a minor repair or a total replacement. I think we've had an impact on septic systems around the waterfronts in the town of Queensbury. As I said, we've had no challenges that I would say are true challenges to the law, and people want to do the right thing. Digging to expose the required parts is the biggest unknown cost of this, depending on the type of system they have. And deed only changes apply to the process, and they get missed on a regular basis, but it seems to be dwindling the amount of ones I find out about month to month. Like I said, when I first started out, I had over 15 every month. Now we're down to about 1 or 2 every 1 or 2 months. So.
Dave, do you keep track of the ages of the systems that you're dealing with in any fashion?
I wouldn't say we keep track of the age. We keep track of the location and the type of system, but we don't keep track of how long the system's been there, because a lot of people don't know. That is the God's honest truth. They just don't know how old their system is. So.
Do you have a minimum age of the house? I mean, if it was built like 3 years ago, do you care about inspecting it? Or is it got to be like 5 years old?
No, anything that's within waterfront residential zone has to have a property transfer inspection, even if it was built last year, still has to have that inspection, because that inspection is different from the inspection we perform when we issue a certificate of occupancy. So.
Okay.
Dave,
Yes.
2 questions. First, do you give any educational information out to the new homeowners on maintenance or anything like that?
No, we don't.
Okay.
As part of the inspection process, no.
Okay. Second, I do recall that I thought there was a challenge. I think it was somebody out on Pilot Knob Road. Were they questioning that, or was there a challenge out there?
He started to question it, and then as he dug into it with his attorneys, he realized it was no win situation and did the right thing, and we got through the process.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, that's my
Just one
PowerPoint
last
for
question,
today.
Dave.
Sure.
What happens in the fact, say the home is in a family trust and the parents die, but the children are still in that trust? Does that constitute a property transfer?
If they make any change to the deed at all, that is considered a required property transfer inspection.
Okay, but if it's in a trust, they wouldn't have to change the deed.
If they change the trust in any way, and I've probably had about a dozen of those where they have changed the deed within the trust, that has triggered the inspection process.
Okay.
Could someone purchase a property, say for instance, in an Inc. or an LLC and not affect the deed?
I don't believe so, because it would require a change in the deed by property owner, so.
Great job.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you much.
All right, and everybody knows how to get a hold of me. I'm not hard to find. So if you have any questions down the road, and Dave and I have talked a couple times already, and I've talked to other municipalities as well. So we're happy to share this with anybody, our successes and what we've learned through the process. We have learned things. I mean, this has been an education for us as well as everybody involved. So, but I think in the long run, it's shown people that there has to be some type of regular inspection of septic systems if you want to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do.
Dave, could you talk for just a second about the process that you had to put in place these new laws, regulations?
Yeah, the process took about 3 years of several meetings with the town board, myself and some advisory groups, to a point where we finally got it towards the finish line. Then it went to public hearings. There were some minor changes made, and then it became effective January 1st, 2019. So it actually started sometime, I don't know the exact date when the first conversation happened, but sometime around 2015, 16. So.
Okay,
Any other questions?
thank you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me. I appreciate it. Good luck, gentlemen, ladies.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We're now in the project review actions report, and Joe Stanek, do you have a resolution for that?
Yes, resolution 2021, number 16. Accept the project review actions report, whereas the commission has received and reviewed the project review actions report prepared by the staff and dated March 15th, 2021, and the project review committee recommends acceptance of the project review actions report. Now therefore be resolved that the commission directs that the project review actions report be incorporated in the minutes of the full commission meeting. So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the project review actions report. All in favor, show of hands. Opposed? It's carried. The first project we have today is the turbo modification submitted by Tiki Tours, Lake George Beach Club, town of Lake George. Joe, do you have something to say about that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. This is a dual application by Lake George Beach Club, as well as Tiki Tours, to add a second Tiki Tour boat at that facility. So it'll be Tiki Tours' second vessel as part of their tour boat operation, and the third tour boat operation to run out of the Lake George Beach Club. You've seen this a couple times over the last several years, so I think we're generally familiar with the operation and the applicant, and I can see that Mr. Tracy has joined us here this morning, so I invite you to unmute yourself and discuss the application.
Morning, board members. Thank you for putting us on the agenda this morning. Hope everybody's doing well under these crazy times. Tiki Tours has been in operation for the past 4 summers, albeit we had some complaints, I think maybe year 1 and possibly year 2. The last 2 years, from what I understand, we've tightened things up with our employees and requirements. Last year, we had a very successful year, even with COVID. It was actually even busier than we've ever seen before. Based on that, we were hoping to seek permission from this body to put on a second Tiki boat. It would be the same dimensions, the same size, the same make, the same model as our current boat, which is 26 feet wide, or I'm sorry, 14 feet wide, 16 feet or 26 feet long. Presently, the New York State Parks has authorized us to have a maximum of 16 passengers, plus one captain and one crew. We did seek permission last year when we received that approval that if we had a capacity less than 12, as most of our captains would prefer not having a crew of 16 or passengers of 16. So we requested from the state permission that if we have passengers less than 12, that we just be required to have a captain, not a captain and crew, to which they agreed. And I believe I did forward that correspondence on to Joe Thuen. So hopefully that's in your information. So we would be looking for an additional boat. Hours of operation would be very similar or identical to what we have been doing the past 2 summers, which is our first charter typically takes off at 11. There's 75-minute charters, staying primarily in the Southern Basin. Although we have ventured out last year, we did take one charter up in Northwest Bay, which it took us a couple hours to get up there. But we've catered to some individuals on Assembly Point and on Cleverdale and some of the west side of the Southern Basin. Last charter of the day is typically at 8 o'clock. Although we do make one exception for having a charter at 9:15 on evenings where there are fireworks in the village. That charter runs from 9:15. Typically, the fireworks go off at 9:30, and it's generally back at 9:45. Again, our captains have indicated they prefer not to be driving after dark, but they're willing to make the exception. And really, the boat doesn't go far from our current location at the Lake George Beach Club. So that's the Tiki Tours portion of the application. The secondary portion of the application is with respect to the Lake George Beach Club. Lake George Beach Club currently is approved for 2 PV vessels. One is operated by my boat with Tiki Tours, and the other, I believe, is a fishing charter. My boat stays there overnight. Both my boats will be staying there overnight in the event we get approval. The fishing charter, from what I understand, berths his boat at Hall's Marina and just utilizes the beach club as a pickup drop-off location. And I think that about covers both applications. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any commissioners have any questions for Mr. Teresi this time? No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Teresi. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to speak about this application? Justin, does there anybody indicate they want to speak? Probably not. In that case, do any commissioners have any comments they want to make? And Joe, do you want to read a resolution?
Yep. Resolution application number, resolution number 2021-17. Application number is TB 21 5 zeros and a 4 and then SPT mod M21 5 zeros and a 4 M1 mod. Applicants are Tiki Tours LLC and Lake George Beach Club. Whereas the applicants have applied for permits to operate a second Tiki Tour boat and modify a Class A marina to increase charter vessels from 2 to 3. And whereas the Lake George Park Commission has reviewed the application, supporting documents, comments received, and other information which appears in the record, and the commission has made a determination that the projects are unlisted actions pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, 6 NYCRR 617.5, and as lead agency for the purposes of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, has made a determination that the projects will not have no significant impact on the environment, and the actions are considered to be a major projects pursuant to 6 NYCRR 645-5.3. Public notice has been published and distributed as required, whereas the applicants have demonstrated that the activity and facility comply with the tour boat requirements of 646-1.4D and number 2, and Class A marina requirements of 6 NYCRR 646-1.2B. And whereas the commission finds that the project will not have an adverse impact on the health, safety, or welfare of the public, the environment, or the resources of the park, will not alter the essential character of the area in which it is proposed, will not lead to congestion in the park, and will not have an undue visual, cultural, audible impact on the neighborhood or the park. Now therefore be resolved, the Lake George Park Commission hereby resolves to approve the above project as proposed. So moved.
Been moved, and I believe Kathy raised her hand to second it. Is there any further discussion on the project? All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. The project has been approved.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Next project is the marina application submitted by Stonegate, Clinton and Partners, Town of Lake George. Joe, do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, thank you. Similar to the last application, this is a dual application for both a marina permit and a tour boat permit submitted for the Stonegate facility. They're seeking to have a new Class A marina offering up to 2 tour boats and 20 non-motorized rental vessels, all to be offered for overnight guests of the facility, not open to the public at large. And of the 2 tour boats, they propose to operate one of the tour boats, which would be a new operation. The agent on behalf of both of these applications is Tracy Boyle. I can see Tracy's been able to join us this morning, so I'd invite you to unmute yourself and discuss the application a little bit more.
Morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, commissioners. I'm one of the partners for Stonegate Resort, and our clients last year were really looking to get on the water, and we want to be able to provide them with that opportunity conveniently. So that's the basis for the application, is really to service our guests. We do have 2 existing docks and our 2 existing boathouses and a dock on the property that we intend to use. So there would be no construction associated with this, other than a little stand to hold the non-motorized boats to keep them organized. So we would propose that the tour company that we're proposing, we would also be owner of. So we would have control of that entity in order to keep it really focused on our guests, because that's what the purpose of this is. It's not for some other, I guess, an outside entity to capitalize on this. And so I think that that's a good benefit to us. We did want to have a backup in case, I don't know, our captain's sick or, something, that we could have the adventure tours come in and service our existing guests. We anticipate very, short time rentals, an hour or 2 for the non-motorized boats. And as far as our new tour boat, White Whale Boats and Tours, we're going to try to be flexible with our offerings, because we really don't know exactly what they're going to want to do, but we're going to propose short 2 or 3 hour tours on the lake where they can go swimming and do some sightseeing, and then we bring them back. So, the details of the times would be, basically during daylight hours, very, very much catered to just keeping the resort a resort is kind of what we're looking to do.
Is there anyone who wants to ask some questions from the applicant? Oh, guess not. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to speak about this application?
Hey,
Joe, you're chairman of the project review committee. Do you want to make any comments about this?
Yes, I think the first thing is that when we visited the site, a number of the members expressed some concerns over having 20 non-motorized in that particular area. And I think that the suggestion was made that we would reduce it to maybe 10 to start out with. And if she wanted to increase it, and if it was appropriate, because it's a busy area, but the application said they were going to try and keep them within 100 feet of the shore. So I think the resolution will read that we will have allow them for 10 non-motorized. And we want to make sure the applicant is okay with that.
I would say that we would be okay with that if we were able to come back at some point, if it made sense to increase it.
Yes, that would be fine. And the other thing that was concerning is in the application, you mentioned that you might be doing tubing and swimming off a Dome Island. And I think what we'd like to do is keep you away from that area. That's pretty busy and very rough area. And maybe around Diamond Island, a closer point to where you are, might be a better solution for you.
Absolutely. We welcome that feedback.
Okay. I think that was all that we discussed then when we were at the site.
Any other commissioners have a comment they want to make? And Joe, I guess you can pick a resolution.
Okay, resolution 2021-18, application number is TB 21503, SPT M20-507 M1. Applicants are Stonegate Resort Management. Whereas the applicants have applied for permits to operate a new tour boat and a new Class A marina offering 2 tour boats and 20 non-motorized boat rentals to overnight guests of the Stonegate Resort. Whereas the Lake George Park Commission has reviewed the applications, supporting documents, comments received, and other information which appears in the record. And whereas the commission has made a determination that the projects are an unlisted action pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, 6 NY CRR 617.5, and as lead agency for the purpose of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, has made a determination that the projects will not have no significant impact on the environment. And whereas the actions are considered to be major projects pursuant to 6 NY CR 645-5.3, public notice has been published and distributed as required, and the applicants have demonstrated that the activity and facility comply with the tour boat requirements of 646-1.4D number 2 and Class A marina requirements of 6 NY CRR 646-1.2B. And whereas the commission finds that the project will not have no adverse impact on the health, safety, or welfare of the public, the environment or the resources of the park, will not alter the essential character of the area in which it is proposed, will not lead to congestion in the park, and will not have an undue visual, cultural, or audible impact on the neighborhood or the park. Now therefore be resolved, the Lake George Park Commission hereby resolves to approve the above applications with the following conditions: that there be no more than 10 non-motorized vessels on the lake, and that tour boat swimming and tubing will be around Diamond Island. So moved.
I have a second. Dave Floyd seconding. Okay, we've had a motion and we've had a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right, thank you very much. Good luck.
Thanks.
Law Enforcement Committee report, Ken Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Law Enforcement Committee did meet this morning, and we discussed major equipment changes for the Marine Patrol. the primary one being a necessary, from our standpoint, change in our radio equipment, both mobile for the boats and fixed base, due to primarily to the fact that local law enforcement departments are changing from analog to digital. And if we want to communicate with them, which we need to communicate with them, we would need to also upgrade our equipment. Sergeant Shane Ross of the Marine Patrol gave us a lengthy discussion and description of the equipment and the process that we use to purchase the replacement equipment from via the state contracts, et cetera, and how they would change slightly our way of communicating with all the other local authorities and within the department. And there is a resolution I'll be presenting covering this subject, and that was all that we discussed in the Law Enforcement Committee. We touched upon our new septic control program, or septic review program, and more information on that is coming forward almost daily. So let me read a resolution. I'm going to read 2021-21, which deals with the radio change and purchase, and then 2021-19 second, which is the meeting. So whereas the Lake George Park Commission maintains 8-vessel Marine Patrol force charged with ensuring the safety of the public as they use the waters of Lake George, and whereas each Marine vessel is equipped with a multi-channel law enforcement radio, which enables officers to communicate with each other, the Commission Office, other police and fire agencies, and the Warren County Sheriff's Dispatcher. And whereas the patrol is required to respond in all conditions to calls for assistance, including storms, fog, and in darkness. And whereas adequate radio communication is imperative for officers and public safety. And whereas the Warren County Sheriff's Department is upgrading their radio communications to digital radio signals, making it impossible for the Lake George Park Commission Marine Patrol to communicate with other agencies without upgrading the current analog radios purchased in 2008. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the commission hereby allocates funds in an amount not to exceed $20,000 for the purchase of 7 multi-channel law enforcement mobile radios, and further resolves that the executive director is authorized to execute a purchase order for the mobile radios consistent with the findings and requirements of the state finance law and Office of Standards and Purchase of the Office of General Services procurement guidelines. And I submit that as a motion.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second from Bill Mason. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And you have the one for the law enforcement report?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Resolution 2021-19, whereas the Law Enforcement Committee met via teleconference March 23rd, 2021 to review matters pertaining to the Lake George Park Commission's Marine Patrol and the Commission's law enforcement program. And whereas active law enforcement cases and their status were reviewed. And whereas the Law Enforcement Committee has reported on the results of that committee meeting at this full commission meeting. And whereas the Law Enforcement Committee recommends acceptance of this month's law enforcement report, now therefore be it resolved that the commission accepts the report of the Law Enforcement Committee, and I offer that as a motion.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the Law Enforcement Committee report. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. That brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to the public comments report. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to make a comment about today's meeting or anything? Justin, do you see anybody? Steve Vermont, I see, has his hand up. Steve?
Mr. Chairman, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good, that's good to hear. I'd just like to comment on behalf of the Lake George Aquatic Invasive Species Prevention Program. Your concurrence about running the boat launch program at Million Dollar Beach, Mossy Point, and Rogers Rock, opening on April 15th and closing on December 15th. And Dave, we'd like to thank you again for your assistance on this, and all the members of the Park Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else in the public comment? There being no more public comments, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion from Joel and a second by Bill Mason to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The meeting is now adjourned.
Dida.
All right.